Dementor. A Dementor was a gliding, wraith-like dark creature, widely considered to be one of the foulest of the dark creatures to inhabit the wizarding world. Dementors fed on human happiness and thus generated feelings of depression and despair in any person in close proximity to them. They could also consume a person's soul, leaving their victims in a permanent vegetative state, and thus were often referred to as soul-sucking fiends, and the people they left soulless were deemed to have been turned into an empty shell. Dementors were closely associated with Azkaban, as they were formerly employed by the British Ministry of Magic as the prison guards, and were not known to permanently inhabit any other location. The Dementors of Azkaban were under the employ of the Ministry until mid-1996, when Lord Voldemort was cited in the Ministry, and their defection to the Dark Lord's cause became undeniable. After the end of the Second Wizarding War in 1998, the Ministry was reformed, and newly appointed Minister for Magic Kingsley Shacklebolt ensured that they were not used by the government again, presumably due to their changing allegiance and support of Voldemort, and due to ethical reforms in the Ministry and Wizarding Society at large. There were certain defenses one could use against Dementors, specifically the Patronus charm. Dementors held no true loyalty, except to whoever could provide them with the most people to feed on. They seemingly could not be destroyed, though their numbers could be limited if the conditions in which they multiply were prevented from forming, implying that they did die off eventually. Early history. The history of Dementors in relation to the Wizarding Society in Britain was inextricably tied up with one location, Azkaban. The island in the North Sea on which the wizard prison was built had never appeared on any map, wizard or muggle. Perhaps its first resident, or even creator, Echrisdes, practiced the worst kinds of dark arts and constructed a fortress on the island, luring muggle sailors there to torture and murder them. After his death, the various concealment charms placed on the island faded, and the Ministry became aware of the mysterious site's existence. Those who entered the deserted fortress to investigate discovered, among other horrors, an infestation of Dementors. Fearing the reprisal of these dark entities should anyone try to evict them, the Ministry decided to let the sizable colony remain unchecked. Hen Damocles Rowell was elected Minister for Magic in 1718. He insisted on utilizing Azkaban's dark pedigree, seeing the Dementors as a potential asset. Putting them to work as guards would save expense, time, and lives. This plan was eventually put into motion and, despite protests, Azkaban remained the prison of the wizarding world right up until the Second Wizarding War, mostly because of its near-zero breakout rate. From that point on, the Dementors served the Ministry of Magic as the guards of Azkaban, as the arrangement allowed them to feed on the emotions of the prisoners within its walls. Somewhere between 1733 and 1747, Minister Eldritch Diggory visited Azkaban and was horrified at the sheer despair and insanity that the Dementors induced within the prisoners. He formed a committee to find alternative solutions, the least of which was to remove the Dementors, which met opposition from those who feared a mainland invasion by the dark creatures if they were deprived of their food source. Alas, Diggory died of dragon pox while in office, and thus the campaign to find an alternative to Azkaban's Dementors stalled. Though their primary function was to guard Azkaban, Dementors also performs other services for the Ministry, such as being sent to guard other locations, escort prisoners to trial, or even hunt down certain criminals. Although many in the wizarding world felt that the Dementors were necessary to keeping the wizarding world safe from Voldemort's supporters and other dangerous criminals, some believed the Dementors to be inherently fickle and untrustworthy. Albus Dumbledore, in particular, thought it was a mistake for the Ministry to ever ally with such creatures, though Alastor Moody thought violent criminals such as Death Eaters deserved such treatment. 1987 to 1988. During the 1987-1988 school year at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, the Dark Wizard Cabal, sent a Dementor to Hogwarts Castle, which attacked Penny Haywood and sent her to the hospital wing. Jacob's sibling investigated the Dementor sighting on the training grounds, and came across it. Eventually, with the help of their friends Marilla Snide and Nymphadora Tonks, they banished the Dementor from Hogwarts with the Patronus charm. 1989 to 1990. During the 1989-1990 school year, Jacob's sibling, Marilla Snide, and Ben Copper encountered several Dementors in the forest grove of the Forbidden Forest which surrounded them. This encounter with Dementors was the result of the students going into the forest to intercept a possible meeting between Jacob, an individual formerly involved in a search for the Cursed Vaults, and the organization, R. A lioness Patronus then appeared and banished the Dementors, which was cast by their mortal nemesis Patricia Rakepick. Rakepick then dueled the students. The duel eventually resulted in the death of Rowan Khanna, who died to protect Ben Copper from being hit by a lethal killing curse cast by Rakepick. 1993 to 1994. During the 1993 to 1994 school year, a legion of Dementors were sent to guard Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry against the deemed mass murderer, Sirius Black, who had recently escaped from Azkaban in 1993. The Dementors were stationed at Hogwarts because of the Ministry believing, incorrectly as it turned out, that Sirius was wanting to kill Harry Potter out of retribution for his master's defeat. The Dementors searched for Sirius on the Hogwarts Express, and Harry Potter had his first encounter with a Dementor, during which he was protected by the new Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, Remus Lupin. Whenever brought into close proximity with one, Harry was forced to relive his worst memory, hearing the last moments of his parents' lives before they were murdered by Lord Voldemort. While the Dementors were at Hogwarts, Headmaster Albus Dumbledore refused to let them enter the school grounds but was unable to prevent their presence entirely, and so warned his students to give the Dementors no reason to harm them. So dangerous did Dumbledore consider them to be that, even when Sirius Black was found to have entered the school, he refused to let them search or enter the castle. Harry endured a second encounter with a group of Dementors during a Quidditch match, causing him to lose consciousness and suffer a fall from his broom. He was that time rescued by Dumbledore, who slowed Harry's fall and then drove the Dementors away with a Patronus. They had a particularly bad effect on Harry due to the memories from his miserable childhood with the Dursleys and a general lot of bad memories. Professor Lupin later claimed that the atmosphere of excitement during a Quidditch match would be like a feast to the Dementors, which they were unable to resist. To overcome the Dementors, Harry asked Lupin for assistance. Lupin began teaching Harry the Patronus charm, using a boggart, which transformed into a Dementor in front of Harry. During the next Quidditch match Harry competed in, for Slytherins, Draco Malfoy, Vincent Crabbe, Gregory Goyle, and Marcus Flint, disguised themselves as Dementors to distract Harry. Although not yet capable of producing a fully formed Patronus, Harry was able to perform the spell well enough to thwart their attempts and won the match, after which Professor Minerva McGonagall sentenced the offending students to detention and deducted 50 house points from Slytherin, describing their stunt as an unworthy trick and the low and cowardly attempt to sabotage the Gryffindor Seeker. Harry's next encounter with the Dementors came when he, Hermione, and Sirius were attacked by a group of them in the Forbidden Forest. The three were saved by the intervention of a powerful and fully formed Patronus before the Dementors were able to take their souls via the Dementor's kiss, defined below. Though initially believed, by Harry, to be the Patronus of his deceased father, this Patronus had in fact been conjured by Harry himself, who had traveled back in time with Hermione Granger using her time turner. This technically counts as both Harry's third and fourth encounter with the Dementors, since, due to his time traveling, he experienced this same encounter twice. Harry's Patronus took the form of a stag, which was both the form his father's Patronus took and the form his father took as an animagus. Because the Dementors tried to kiss Harry during this encounter in the forest, it was enough to convince the Minister for Magic Cornelius Fudge to have the Dementors removed from Hogwarts at the end of the school year. Dumbledore seemed very happy about this. 1994 to 1995. Harry met an apparent Dementor in the Triwizard Tournament. Thinking that it was a real Dementor, he conjured the Patronus charm, and soon the Dementor stumbled, and then Harry knew it was a boggart and soon cried, "Ridiculous." That same evening, Fudge brought along a Dementor when he was notified that the Death Eater, Bartemius Crouch Jr., responsible for the activities that occurred, was captured, for his own security, disregarding Minerva McGonagall's protest. The Dementor attacked the prisoner, who was also an escapee of Azkaban, on sight, sucking his soul out, which Fudge claimed it was no loss as he saw Crouch as a raving lunatic unworthy of bearing testimony. Dumbledore, who disapproved of this move, suggested Fudge to remove the Dementors from Azkaban to deprive Voldemort of their services, which Fudge thought to be absurd, as he did not believe Voldemort's return. He believed that even suggesting that the Azkaban guards be removed would result in him being impeached. 1995 to 1996. Harry's fifth encounter was in an alley near his home on Privet Drive, when he and his cousin, Dudley Dursley, were ambushed by two Dementors sent secretly and illegally by Dolores Umbridge. He successfully used the Patronus charm and was subsequently guided home by a squib named Arabella Figg. Harry was put on trial for his use of underage magic in front of a Muggle, Dudley, but ultimately was not punished, as it was recognized as having been self-defense. Nearly a year later, Umbridge admitted the plan to attack and undermine Harry using the Dementors. The encounter also had the unintended side effect of prompting Dudley to begin to change his life for the better, after years of being a cruel, selfish bully, as his exposure to the Dementors' powers forced him to face these aspects of himself. By June 1996, all of the Dementors of Azkaban collectively rebelled against their employers to join Lord Voldemort, who offered them more victims and free reign across the country. This aided the 1996 and 1997 escapes of Death Eaters from Azkaban. By mid-1996, the Dementors who had joined Voldemort were multiplying in such quantities as to generate an unseasonal July mist, noticeable to both the Muggle and Wizarding worlds alike. Cornelius Fudge also admitted they were factors in the British Prime Minister's recent decline in terms of public approval, as they were making people less happy in general. 1997 to 1998. During the 1997 infiltration of the Ministry of Magic, while Harry Potter was disguised as Albert Runcorn, he encountered the Dementors in the Muggleborn Registration Commission courtroom, where they were used to take away convicted Muggleborns after interrogation and to terrorize them during interrogation. Dolores Umbridge protected herself and the other questioners with a cat Patronus, which dissipated when Harry stunned her. Without Umbridge to control them, a Dementor attempted to give the kiss to Mary Cattermole, the Muggleborn being interrogated at the time. Harry saved Mary with his own Patronus, which drove all of the Dementors in the courtroom into the corners due to its greater power than Umbridge's. Hermione cast a Patronus of her own, and Harry and Hermione used their patron uses to keep the Dementors in the courtroom and the hallway outside at bay so that they could rescue all of the remaining Muggleborns. As the group left the area, Harry and Hermione left their patron uses in the hallway to hold the Dementors at bay for as long as possible while they made their escape. After apparating to Hogsmeade, Harry, Ron, and Hermione set off a caterwauling charm and hid under Harry's invisibility cloak. Unable to find them, the Death Eaters dispatched Dementors to attack the trio, as Dementors sensed the presence of others and did not rely on sight. Harry was forced to cast his Patronus to protect the trio from being kissed. They could not disapparate due to an anti-disapparition jinx placed on the village and were stuck, caterwauling charm. Harry drove away the Dementors, but almost gave the three away, as his Patronus was very distinctive. Aberforth Dumbledore saved them and passed off Harry's stag as his own goat Patronus and ushered the trio into his pub. In fact, Harry welcomed the fate that came with a Dementor's kiss, but Seamus Finnegan, Luna Lovegood, and Ernie Macmillan attacked the Dementors with their own patron uses, holding them at bay, and encouraged Harry to do the same, allowing him to finally summon his Patronus, which caused the Dementors to scatter. Later, Harry encountered more Dementors in the Forbidden Forest, but the presence of James, Lily, Sirius and Remus, summoned through the Resurrection Stone, shielded him from them. Post-1998. After the Second Wizarding War, the Ministry of Magic became headed by former Auror and Order of the Phoenix member Kingsley Shacklebolt. Due to their actions during the war, allowing Death Eaters to escape back to Voldemort and joining forces with him themselves, Shacklebolt disbanded the Dementors as guards of Azkaban. After the Dementors were removed from the prison, Aurors were placed in the prison as guards. During the 2010 to 2011 school year, a fearsome amount of Dementors attacked Hogwarts Castle. One of their first attacks was on Professor Longbottom and students while they were picking herbs at the edge of the Forbidden Forest. An attack on 2 students followed, which was fended off by Professor Flitwick. A Dementor also attacked Daniel Page in the greenhouses, but he was saved by Flitwick as well. Soon, the Dementors summoned other creatures to attack Hogwarts alongside them, and the professors had to put up a huge shield around the castle to defend against them, much like during the Battle of Hogwarts. The creatures still penetrated the shield regardless, and a big battle ensued. It was also after the Dementors were dismissed from Azkaban that one of them sided with Victor Gridley, who found it in a dark corner of London. Gridley later recruited another Dementor to help him in his criminal acts. They were locked in cages in the dungeon of his caravan, but could be released to engage in attacks. During the same school year, the Dementors attacked students who were thrown into the dungeon by Gridley, but having already mastered the Patronus charm, the students easily defended themselves from them. 2020. In one of the alternate realities in which Scorpius Malfoy found himself, the Dementors were near the Great Lake at Hogwarts. The students saw these creatures on October 22 when he was caught by Dolores Umbridge, who was the headmistress of the school. A week later, when Scorpius, Hermione Granger, Ron Weasley and Severus Snape returned after making a change in the past, they were found by Dementors. Since Hermione and Ron were wanted by arrest warrant, they decided to stay to give the remaining time to save themselves. Ron tried to conjure a Patronus, but Hermione stopped him to sacrifice herself and keep these creatures there. The Dementors quickly found them and drained their souls. Snape left with Scorpius and encouraged him so that the boy would not give in to the despair spread by these creatures. Soon they met Umbridge, who recognized that Snape was working against her and Voldemort, but was rejected by his spell. Then the Dementors attacked, but Severus conjured up a Patronus and promised to keep them as long as possible to ensure that Scorpius could escape. Malfoy ran in the trail of a silver doe, and Snape was deprived of his soul by these creatures. The Patronus kept Scorpius safe long enough to reach the Great Lake and set things right. Appearances. Dementors had a humanoid shape, approximately 3 meters, or 10 feet high, and were covered in dark hooded cloaks of long ripped black cloth, making them closely resemble wraiths. Its body was grayed and decayed looking, like a decomposing corpse, and its breath sounded rattling, like it was trying to suck more than air out of a room. Its hands were glistening, grayish, slimy looking, and scabbed. They seemed to exude cold. When in a cluster, Dementors appeared as a foul mist. A Dementor's face had empty eye sockets, covered with scabbed skin. There was a gaping large hole where the mouth should have been, which was used for sucking the soul out of the victim in a process called the Dementor's kiss, leaving victims in a state generally considered worse than death. The Dementor pulled back its hood and sucked out its victim's soul, leaving the person an empty shell, alive but completely, irretrievably, gone. They were described as being able to glide over the ground only, and in any case, they couldn't pass through solid obstacles. Dementors were also known to be blind, as they did not have eyes. However, they could sense whether a presence was near them or not, by sensing the victim's emotions. Nature and behavior. Dementors seemed to suck all the light and happiness from the air as they drew long rattling breaths, and caused darkness to close in everywhere and the victim to feel incredibly cold. They could glide towards a victim without sound. Their sapience was heavily debated. They were sentient enough to taste and sense fear, being drawn to it and the promise of positive memories that it could feed off of. They were also intelligent enough to be greedy. They obeyed the British Ministry of Magic for years because, in guarding Azkaban, they were provided with the sustenance of any remaining hope or happiness in the prisoners. They could understand and follow at least simple instructions, which allowed Dementors to act as a bodyguard to Minister for Magic Cornelius Fudge in 1995, to bury dead prisoners in the prison grounds, and to escort prisoners in and out of the Muggle-born Registration Commission courtroom in 1997. They could also communicate what they had heard Sirius Black saying in his sleep to the Ministry in 1993, and comment on his less human, less complex state of mind, in his animagus form, implying that they could speak or otherwise communicate with wizards. On the other hand, Albus Dumbledore described Dementors as savage creatures unable to differentiate between who they pursue and who stands in their way. He also informed the students to give Dementors no reason to harm them, saying that forgiveness and mercy are not in the nature of a Dementor. Moreover, they reportedly had no soul of their own, though it could be argued that soulless is merely figurative in this instance. Outside of Azkaban, Dementors appeared to hunt for prey in groups of variable size, from as small as 2 to as large as greater than 20. They appeared to attack by first surrounding their targets, cutting off any escape, then descending upon them all at once to feed. Abilities. Being blind, Dementors sensed and fed on the positive emotions of human beings in order to survive, forcing their victims to relive their worst memories over and over again. The very presence of a Dementor could make the victim's surrounding atmosphere grow cold and dark, and as the number of Dementors increased, so did the effects. Those that were kept in the company of a Dementor for too long tended to become depressed, and were often driven insane, which was the main source of Azkaban's well-deserved horrible reputation when they still guarded its prisoners. After spending only a few months there, Rubeus Hagrid claimed he wished he would die in his sleep. For this reason, they were considered some of the foulest creatures on Earth. Dementors relied fully on their ability to sense emotion and physical and/or mental health to track the movements of the prisoners in their care, and were generally unable to distinguish one person from another if both were in similar physical or mental condition. They were unable to identify Mrs. Crouch being sneaked into Azkaban disguised as Bartemius Crouch Jr. using Polyjuice Potion, or Barty Crouch Jr. being sneaked out disguised as his mother, since both were ill nearly to the point of death, as divulged by Bartemius Crouch Jr. under the influence of Veritaserum in 1995, though it may be that they simply did not care whom they were sucking happiness from so long as they were fed. They were genderless and did not mate, and they grew like fungus where there was decay. Dementors seemingly didn't feel and recognize animal emotions in the same way as human emotions. When Sirius Black, an animagus, was imprisoned in Azkaban in his dog form before his eventual successful escape also as a dog, his emotions were less human. The Dementors could feel there was a difference in his emotions when he changed his form, but they didn't understand why there was such a difference. They simply thought he was losing his mind. Although Muggles couldn't see Dementors, they were affected in a way similar to wizards and witches, becoming depressed when near them. It was under debate if squibs were able to see Dementors. While Arabella Figg had claimed in the Wisengamot courtroom to have seen the Dementors that had attacked Harry and Dudley in Little Whinging, it was later confirmed that she had lied. It was unclear if she was unable to see the Dementors or if she was merely arriving late at the scene. After Morphin Gaunt and Bartemius Crouch Jr.'s mother died in Azkaban, Dementors buried their bodies, which shows that Dementors are capable of physical labor, such as grave digging. Also, Sirius escaped when the Dementors came to give food, another sort of labor. It was stated by Remus Lupin that, if a wizard remained in close contact with Dementors for an extended period of time, a Dementor could drain a wizard of his powers. This fact was not expounded upon, so the truth to this statement was unknown. If this was the case, however, it would make Dementors the only known being to permanently render a wizard without magic. Lupin might also have meant this metaphorically, as severe depression, which was caused by prolonged contact with Dementors, could be really detrimental to a wizard's ability to cast spells. Dementor's Kiss. In addition to feeding on positive emotions, Dementors could perform their last and most dangerous ability, the Dementor's Kiss, in which a Dementor latched its mouth onto a victim's and sucked out the person's soul. The victim was left as an empty shell, incapable of thought and with no possibility of recovery. It was believed that existing after a Dementor's kiss was worse than death, as a person's soul was their true self. To be kissed by a Dementor was to cease to exist, and yet also remain. The British Ministry of Magic occasionally allowed this as a punishment, before Kingsley Shacklebolt became Minister for Magic. It was unknown what effect a Dementor's kiss would have had on a person who had split his or her soul through the use of a Horcrux. It was also possible that the soul was trapped inside the Dementor, thus the victim was unable to pass on. This was probably what "worse than death" meant. The only known named victim of the kiss is Barty Crouch Jr. From 1994 to 1995, Crouch had been using Polyjuice Potion to pose as Alastair Moody, and had been teaching at Hogwarts in his stead. He was detained at the castle, awaiting trial, after his ploy was discovered, and it emerged that he had been working in secret for Voldemort. He was subjected to the punishment by a Dementor accompanying Cornelius Fudge as a bodyguard. The unfortunate consequence of this act was that it rendered Crouch unable to testify about his master's return, allowing Voldemort almost a full year to gather strength while the Ministry continued in its denial. Protection from Dementors. Patronus Charm. No one had ever demonstrated the ability to kill a Dementor, by Avada Kedavra or otherwise, implying that they couldn't be killed through physical means, but could only be driven away or temporarily kept at bay. One of the few ways to shield oneself from Dementors was by the very difficult Patronus Charm. The charm summoned a Patronus, a magical manifestation of goodwill and happiness, providing varied levels of protection against the Dementor's influence, based on the caster's strength as a wizard. With sufficient ability, a single wizard could hold off dozens, if not hundreds, of Dementors with a single corporeal Patronus. Harry Potter demonstrated during his third year at Hogwarts when he drove off a horde of Dementors seeking to consume Hermione Granger, Sirius Black, and Harry's past selves. As the Patronus was not alive, the Dementor couldn't feed on it. Only when summoned by an experienced caster would the Patronus take the form of an animal significant in some way to the individual. While the lower-level Patronus was more amorphous and ephemeral, corporeal patron uses chased down Dementors and forced them to flee the vicinity. An incorporeal Patronus only slowed a Dementor down, as if the creature was walking through quicksand, and tended not to last long, but could eventually give the caster time to escape. Since Dementors couldn't properly sense the less complex thoughts and emotions of a person when they took on an animagus form, doing so allowed some, such as Sirius Black, to temporarily avoid feeling the effects of the Dementor's presence. When they sensed the less-than-human thoughts of his animagus form, the Dementors simply thought Sirius was losing his mind. The effects of a Dementor's happiness-draining powers could also be resisted if one focused not on happy thoughts, but on obsessions, or other things that gave one strength without exactly making one feel better. For example, Sirius managed to avoid going mad in the Dementor's custody and eventually plan an escape by focusing on the fact that he was innocent and didn't belong in Azkaban, and later that Peter Pettigrew was at Hogwarts and that Harry was in danger. However, this feat was mostly attributed to the fact of him being an animagus who was able to temporarily avoid feeling the effects of the Dementor's presence in his animal form. Though clearly not a common method of repelling Dementors, the enigmatic form people took after being brought back by the Resurrection Stone appeared to function much like a Patronus, as the resurrected forms of Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and James and Lily Potter were able to shield Harry Potter from the Dementors that Voldemort had stationed in the Forbidden Forest in 1998. And also, after Harry returned from the brink of life and death, he was so overcome with joy at being alive that the Dementors had no effect on him, showing that if a person was truly happy as he could be, the Dementor's main weapon was rendered useless. There may have been another, more common way of repelling and defending against a Dementor, aside from the Patronus charm, as Remus Lupin stated that there were certain defenses against Dementors. Also, Harry Potter disagreed with Professor Snape on the best method for confronting one when it was the subject of a report in his 6th year. This implies that there were, indeed, other methods. The mood-enhancing properties of chocolate were well known in both the Muggle and Wizarding worlds. Chocolate was the perfect antidote for anyone who had been overcome in the presence of Dementors, which sucked hope and happiness out of their surroundings. Chocolate could only be a short-term remedy, however. Finding ways to fight off Dementors, or depression, were essential if one was to become permanently happier. Excessive chocolate consumption couldn't benefit either Muggle or Wizard. Dark wizards couldn't commonly produce patron uses. However, they did not need to do so in the first place, as they were like-minded in evil. Voldemort even stated that they were natural allies. This did not, however, prevent Dementors from imprisoning dark wizards in Azkaban. Etymology. The English word Dementor is used generically to refer to any evil or fearsome creature. The word ultimately derives from the Latin demens, meaning insane. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.